Liam felt the familiar chill of the room settle into his bones, a cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the icy atmosphere of his in-laws' formal dining room, a place where he was perpetually an unwelcome guest. He sat silently, a ghost at the feast, watching the spectacle of their wealth. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, casting rainbows on the polished mahogany table. Silverware, heavy and ornate, lay beside plates of porcelain so fine they looked translucent. His wife, Sophia, sat opposite him, a queen in her inherited kingdom. She was laughing, a sound that once felt like music to him, but now grated like shattering glass. Her laughter was directed at a joke her brother Marcus had just made at Liam's expense. Liam had not quite heard it, having retreated into the quiet fortress of his own mind, but he caught the tail end of it, something about thrift store suits.
"Oh, Marcus, you are terrible," Sophia trilled, though her eyes danced with cruel amusement. She glanced at Liam, her expression a perfect mask of pity that did not quite hide the contempt beneath. Her gaze flickered over his simple, dark grey suit, a well-made but unremarkable garment he had owned for years. It was clean, it was neat, but in this room it was a declaration of poverty. "I'm just being practical, sister," Marcus said, leaning forward with a predatory gleam in his eye. He was a younger, brasher version of his father, a man who wore his arrogance like a cologne. "We have to take care of family, don't we? Liam, old boy, things are still tight, I hear. How about I front you the cash for a proper tailor? Can't have my brother-in-law looking like he's soliciting donations." The words hung in the air, sharp and pointed. Liam's mother-in-law, Eleanor, let out a long, theatrical sigh.
She delicately placed her fork down, as if the conversation had ruined her appetite. "Marcus, please, not at the table," she murmured, a weak protest that served only to amplify the insult. Her disappointment in Sophia's choice of husband was a constant, simmering presence in their lives. Liam did not rise to the bait. He had learned long ago that silence was his only shield. He simply offered a small, tight smile that did not reach his eyes. "I'm all right, Marcus, but thank you for the offer." "It's not an offer, it's charity," Sophia cut in, her voice suddenly sharp as a blade. "That's what this is, isn't it? For 3 years we have been carrying you. I have to endure the whispers from my friends, the looks from my family, all because my husband's grand ambitions fell apart and left him with nothing but dust in his pockets." Her words were a public flogging. Each one landed with a painful, familiar sting. He felt the eyes of her father, a silent, stony patriarch at the head of the table, judging him. He felt the smug satisfaction radiating from Marcus. He felt the crushing weight of Sophia's profound, bottomless disappointment. He had become her greatest shame. In his pocket, his fingers found the cold, heavy object he always carried. It was an old, ornate key made of a dark, unidentifiable metal. It was his only inheritance from his grandfather, a man who had been a quiet enigma his entire life. He had given it to Liam on his deathbed, his voice a dry whisper. "This opens a door, Liam," his grandfather had said, his eyes surprisingly lucid in those final moments. "Not to a place, but to who you really are. When you feel you have nothing left, you'll understand." For years the words had been a mystery. Liam had thought it was a metaphor for inner strength, a call to find resilience within himself. But as he sat there, enduring another barrage of casual cruelty from the family he had married into, he began to wonder if it was something more. He felt he had nothing left. The love he thought he had was gone, replaced by this bitter resentment. His dignity was a tattered rag they tugged at for sport. He felt the serrated edges of the key's head press into his thumb. It was a solid, tangible thing in a life that had become a phantom limb. The humiliation was a fire licking at his feet, but the key was an anchor. He held on to it, a silent promise to a dead man, and endured. He let their laughter wash over him, their scornful glances slide off his placid expression. They saw a weak, broken man, a charity case. They had no idea what was sleeping behind his patient eyes. The dinner dragged on, a slow-motion torment of polite conversation, layered over a brutal subtext. Liam ate his food mechanically, the taste of expensive cuisine turning to ash in his mouth. He listened to them discuss their upcoming ski trip to Aspen, the new yacht Marcus was considering, the political fundraiser Eleanor was chairing. Their lives were a relentless performance of status, a world from which he had been thoroughly ejected. "You're awfully quiet, Liam," Eleanor noted, her voice dripping with false concern. "Is everything all right?" "Just tired," he replied, the standard answer he gave to any inquiry about his well-being. It was true, in a way. He was tired. Not from a lack of sleep, but from the bone-deep weariness of pretending. The pretense had started 3 years ago. It began as an experiment, a desperate test born from a moment of crisis. The great market correction of that year had been brutal. Liam, who had built a modest but impressive fortune in tech investments, saw his portfolio evaporate in a matter of days, or so it seemed. The news had reported financial carnage, and his primary investment vehicle, a fund known for its aggressive strategies, had been one of the biggest casualties. He remembered the day he told Sophia he had sat her down, his face grim, and explained that everything was gone. The stocks, the savings, the future he had promised her. He had lost it all. He watched her face, searching for a glimmer of the woman he had married, the one who had claimed to love him for who he was, not what he had. For a week, she had been perfect. She held him, told him it didn't matter, that they would get through it together. They were a team. But a week turned into a month, and the supportive words began to curdle into sighs of frustration. A month turned into 6, and the frustration hardened into a sharp-edged resentment. The truth was, Liam hadn't lost everything. He had been smarter, or perhaps luckier, than most. Weeks before the crash, guided by a deep-seated instinct he inherited from his grandfather, he had quietly diversified. He had moved the bulk of his assets into obscure, stable, and frankly boring commodities and old-world industrial stocks that the rest of the market ignored. He had even shorted the very tech bubble that had made him his initial fortune. When the dust settled, he had not been wiped out. Far from it. He had nearly tripled his net worth. It was a staggering, life-altering sum of money. He remembered staring at the numbers on his private terminal, a dizzying array of zeros that felt unreal. His first instinct was to run to Sophia, to tell her the wonderful news, to celebrate their incredible luck. But he hesitated. The memory of her fleeting support, already souring after only a few weeks, gave him pause. A cold, dreadful question began to form in his mind. Was her love conditional? Had she only loved the successful, wealthy Liam? He had to know. So he made a decision. A secret, painful decision. He would pretend. He would play the part of the broken man. He told her the small, stable funds he had left were just enough to cover their basic living expenses, but the lifestyle they knew was over. It was a test. A cruel test, perhaps, but one he felt he had to administer. He needed to know if the foundation of their marriage was built on rock or on sand. For 3 years he got his answer, delivered in 1,000 small cuts. It began with the cancelled vacations. "But everyone goes to Italy in the summer," she had whined, as if he were denying her oxygen. Then it was the move from their spacious modern home to a modest suburban house he had owned outright from before they met. She called it a hovel. Her friends, once his, began to treat him with a detached, clinical pity. He was no longer invited to golf games or weekend trips. He was a social liability. At parties they were still obligated to attend. Sophia would introduce him with a sigh. "This is my husband, Liam," and the unspoken addendum, "the failure," hung in the air between them. Paragraph. She took a job at her father's company, Prestige Holdings, a sprawling conglomerate of luxury brands and real estate. She framed it as her doing her part, but it was really a retreat back to the safety and status of her family's wealth. It was there that her contempt for him truly blossomed, watered daily by the arrogant ethos of her father and brother. They believed fervently in the gospel of wealth. To them, a person's net worth was a direct measure of their intelligence, their drive, their very worth as a human being. In their eyes, Liam had not just lost money. He had lost his right to an opinion, to respect, to dignity. He was a fallen creature, and they treated him as such. Now at this dinner, the culmination of those 3 years of quiet observation, Liam felt the experiment was over. The results were in, and they were devastatingly clear. The foundation of their marriage was not sand, it was a sinkhole. As the dessert plates were cleared, Sophia made her move. She stood up, her posture regal and dismissive. "Well, this has been lovely," she announced, her voice carrying a finality that made Liam's stomach clench. "But Julian is waiting for me. We have a reservation." Julian, the flashy real estate developer she had been seeing for the past 6 months. She did not even bother to hide it anymore. She called it a friendship, but the late nights, the weekend trips, and the expensive gifts she now wore told a different story. It was a brazen public humiliation, and she wielded it like a weapon, daring him to challenge her. She knew he couldn't. A broken man had no leverage. Marcus smirked. "Give Julian my best. He's closing that big waterfront deal next week. A real shark, that one."
"Not like some fish I know." He winked at Liam, who felt another spike of cold anger. Sophia didn't even look at Liam as she left. She simply walked out of the room, her perfume trailing behind her, a scent of betrayal. Liam was left alone with her family, an island of inadequacy in their sea of opulence. He excused himself shortly after, the false pleasantries sticking in his throat. He drove home to the small, quiet house that Sophia despised. The silence inside was a relief. It was a space free of judgment. Here he was not the charity case. He was just Liam. That night he didn't sleep. He sat in his small home office, the one Sophia never entered, and opened the old, leather-bound journal he had found among his grandfather's effects. It was filled with his grandfather's spidery handwriting, detailing decades of thoughts on markets, politics, and philosophy. He had been searching for any mention of the key. For weeks he had found nothing.
But tonight, driven by a new sense of urgency, he was more meticulous. He examined the inside cover again. Tucked into a hidden slit in the leather was a small, folded piece of paper he had somehow missed before. He carefully unfolded it. On it was a single crest, an embossed image of a wolf's head holding a key in its mouth. It was an exact match for the one on the head of his own key. Below the crest was an address, not a street address, but a name and a city, Argentum Trust, Geneva. A quick search online revealed almost nothing. Argentum Trust was not a commercial bank. It had no public website, no marketing, no listed phone number. It was a ghost, a name that appeared only in obscure financial registries as a private, multi-generational wealth management firm. It was one of the oldest and most discreet in the world. A cold thrill ran down Liam's spine. This was it. This was the door his grandfather had spoken of. The cruelty of the dinner, Sophia's blatant infidelity, the suffocating weight of the last 3 years, it all coalesced into a single point of decision. He had to go. He had to know. He booked a flight for the next morning. He left a simple note for Sophia on the kitchen counter. Gone for a few days, family matter. He packed a small bag, taking nothing but a change of clothes, the journal, and the heavy, dark key. The flight to Geneva was a journey through a fog of uncertainty. He was a man stepping off a cliff, not knowing if he would find wings or jagged rocks below. He had lived a lie for 3 years, sacrificing his own comfort and pride for a truth that had turned out to be ugly and painful. Now he was chasing a dead man's riddle, a final, desperate hope that there was more to his story than this chapter of humiliation. As the plane descended over the pristine waters of Lake Geneva, he felt a strange sense of calm. He had reached the bottom. He had endured the worst of it. Whatever happened next, it could not be worse than the slow, emotional death he had been living. The key felt heavy in his pocket, a promise of an answer, one way or another. Geneva was a city of quiet, confident wealth. It was not flashy like his in-laws' world. The money here was old, silent, and deeply embedded in the stone of the buildings and the calm demeanor of the people. It was a city that understood the power of discretion, a concept entirely foreign to Sophia and her family. The address from the journal led him to a stately, unassuming building on a quiet street overlooking the lake. There was no sign, only a heavy oak door with a small, polished brass plaque that read, Argentum Trust. It felt less like a bank and more like a private club or an old university faculty. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The interior was hushed and cool. A single security guard stood by a reception desk carved from a dark, rich wood. A woman with silver hair and an impeccably tailored suit looked up at him, her expression neutral. "May I help you?" she asked, her English perfect, with a faint French accent. Liam's heart was pounding. This felt like a moment of truth. He could be turned away, dismissed as a lunatic with a strange key. He reached into his pocket and placed the key on the polished surface of the desk. "My grandfather," he began, his voice hoarse, "told me this would open a door here." The woman's eyes widened, but only for a fraction of a second. Her professional composure was flawless. She looked from the key to Liam's face, then back to the key. She picked it up, examining the crest of the wolf's head. A flicker of recognition, or perhaps deference, crossed her face. "One moment, please," she said softly. She disappeared through a door behind her, taking the key with her. Liam stood alone in the lobby, his hands clenched into fists. The silence was absolute. Every second stretched into an eternity. He was acutely aware of the security guard, who was now watching him with a new, focused intensity. He felt like an imposter, a man who had wandered into a world where he did not belong. After what felt like a lifetime, the door opened again. The woman returned, followed by an older gentleman. He was tall and slender, with a neatly trimmed white beard and sharp, intelligent eyes behind gold-rimmed spectacles. He wore a three-piece suit that spoke of timeless elegance, not fleeting fashion. He radiated an aura of quiet authority. He approached Liam, his hand extended. "Mr. Liam Sterling?" he asked, his voice a warm baritone. Liam was so stunned that someone here knew his name that he could only nod as he shook the man's hand. "I am Jean-Luc Dubois," the man said, "Managing Director of Argentum Trust. We have been expecting you for a very long time." He was holding the key. "Your grandfather Thomas was a very dear friend and our most esteemed client. Please come with me." Dubois led him through the door and down a corridor lined with dark wood panelling and oil paintings of stern-looking men. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, leather, and money. This was a place where fortunes were not made, but preserved, nurtured across generations. They entered a large, circular office. The far wall was a single pane of glass, offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the lake and the mountains beyond. Dubois gestured for Liam to sit in one of the leather armchairs facing a grand, uncluttered desk. "Your grandfather was a man of extraordinary foresight," Dubois began, sitting opposite him. "He was also a man who valued character above all else. He structured his estate in a very particular way. He believed that true wealth could corrupt as easily as it could build. He wanted to ensure his legacy would fall into the hands of someone who understood its true purpose." Liam listened, his mind reeling. He was beginning to understand. This wasn't just about an inheritance. It was another test, a bigger one. "For the past 3 years," Dubois continued, his gaze steady and penetrating, "we have been monitoring your situation as per Thomas's instructions. We have compiled a complete report on your personal and financial life. Your decision to feign insolvency, the dissolution of your personal relationships, the treatment you received from your wife and her family, we are aware of all of it." A cold shock went through Liam. He had been watched. His private, painful experiment had been an audition. He felt a surge of anger, a feeling of being manipulated, but it was quickly replaced by a dawning, stunning realization. His grandfather had known. He had anticipated the rot in Liam's life and had built a firewall around his legacy to protect it. "Your grandfather stipulated that you were only to gain access to the estate after proving you could live without it," Dubois explained. "After proving you valued integrity over comfort and dignity over approval. He wanted to see if you were his grandson in spirit, not just in blood. You have passed his test, Mr. Sterling, with flying colours." Dubois leaned forward and placed a single, thick leather portfolio on the desk between them. He slid it across the polished surface. "This is a summary of the assets held in your name by the Thomas Sterling Heritage Trust." Liam's hand trembled as he reached for it. He opened the cover. The first page was a simple statement of net asset value. The number was so large, so impossibly vast, that he could not process it. It was a string of zeros that seemed to stretch into infinity. It was not millions. It was billions, tens of billions. He stared at the number, his vision blurring. He felt a wave of vertigo, as if the floor had dropped away from him. This was not wealth. This was power, the kind of power that shaped nations and moved markets. "Your grandfather was not just an investor, Mr. Sterling," Dubois said gently, seeming to understand Liam's shock. "He was a founder, a silent partner. He provided the seed capital for some of the world's largest corporations, banks and investment funds in exchange for a permanent, non-dilutable stake. His philosophy was to own the foundations, the pipelines, the bedrock upon which others built their empires." Liam flipped through the pages, his mind numb. He saw names he recognized: global banking giants, multinational corporations, colossal private equity firms. The trust held significant, often controlling, stakes in all of them. He was not just a rich man, he was a central node in the entire global financial system. Then he saw a name that made his blood run cold. Helios Capital Partners. "Ah, yes," Dubois said, noticing his focus. "One of the trust's many holdings, a mid-sized but very aggressive investment firm based in Hong Kong. Is it significant?" "It's the primary lender for my wife's family's company, Prestige Holdings," Liam said, his voice barely a whisper. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture of such staggering, cruel irony that he almost wanted to laugh. Dubois raised an eyebrow. He consulted a tablet on his desk, his fingers flying across the screen. After a moment he looked up, a grim understanding on his face. I see. According to our records, Prestige Holdings is leveraged to an extraordinary degree. Over 90% of their operating capital is debt, the majority of which is held by Helios. Their entire enterprise, their lifestyle, it is all financed by you. The irony was a physical blow. For 3 long years they had mocked him for his poverty, flaunted their wealth in his face, and treated him as a worthless parasite. All the while, they had been living on his money, their arrogance, their contempt. Their entire hollow empire was a house of cards built on a foundation that he, the man they despised, now owned completely. The full weight of it settled upon him. The years of quiet suffering, the endless humiliations, the patient endurance, it had all led to this moment. He was not the victim in this story. He was the judge. He closed the portfolio and looked at Dubois, his eyes clear and hard. The patient, broken man he had been pretending to be was gone. In his place was someone else, someone forged in the fires of betrayal and vindicated by a legacy of unimaginable power. "Mr. Dubois," Liam said, his voice level and cold. "I need to be introduced to my legal team, the best ones. I have a plan."
It's time to call in some loans. The decision was made in the silent, rarefied air of the Geneva office. It was not a choice born of anger or revenge, though those emotions were certainly present. It was a decision born of a need for order, for justice. It was the click of a universe falling back into alignment. The world had been upside down for 3 years. He was about to set it right. Dubois, ever the consummate professional, simply nodded. "We have a team on retainer in London, the finest in the world when it comes to corporate restructuring and asset reclamation. They are led by a Mr. Alistair Harrison. He is formidable. I will arrange a secure conference call immediately." Within the hour, Liam was sitting in a state-of-the-art telepresence suite, looking at the face of Alistair Harrison. The man was exactly as Dubois had described. He was in his late 50s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He exuded a kind of predatory intelligence.
"Mr. Sterling," Harrison began, his voice a crisp, upper-class English accent. "Jean-Luc has given me the broad strokes, an intricate and personal situation. Before we discuss strategy, I want to be clear on your objective. What is the desired outcome?" Liam did not hesitate. He had been rehearsing this moment in his mind for 3 years without even knowing it. The desired outcome is a total and complete dismantling of Prestige Holdings. I want the company dissolved. I want the family's assets seized to cover their debts. I want them to be left with absolutely nothing. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But it has to be done perfectly, legally. I don't want this to be a messy public battle. I want it to be a controlled demolition. I want them to be ruined not by my power, but by their own arrogance and their own financial recklessness. And at the very, very end, when there is no escape, I want them to know that it was me." A slow smile spread across Harrison's face. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a surgeon who has just been presented with a fascinatingly complex tumor to remove. "An elegant objective, Mr. Sterling. Precise. Surgical. I like it." For the next 2 hours, Harrison and his team laid out the plan. It was a masterpiece of legal and financial maneuvering. They would not use a sledgehammer. They would use a scalpel. "The beauty of this situation," Harrison explained, pointing to a complex flowchart on the screen, "is that they have done all the work for us. Their debt-to-equity ratio is catastrophic. Their personal guarantees are extensive. They have cross-collateralized every asset they own, from their corporate headquarters to their family homes, to secure these loans. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 was the squeeze. Helios Capital Partners, the firm Liam now controlled, would initiate a series of aggressive but entirely legal maneuvers. They would enforce obscure covenants in the loan agreements. They would demand a full, immediate, and invasive audit of Prestige Holdings books. This would sow panic and freeze their operational liquidity. They will see it as a bureaucratic nightmare, Harrison said. Hostile, certainly, but they will assume it's a faceless corporation in Hong Kong trying to renegotiate terms. They will have no idea it's a targeted attack. Phase 2 was the cascade. As Prestige Holdings' finances were squeezed, their other creditors would get nervous. Their stock price would falter. Liam's other holding companies would then begin to quietly buy up Prestige's devalued corporate bonds and secondary debt for pennies on the dollar. Within weeks, Liam would control not just the primary debt through Helios, but nearly all of it. It will be a domino effect, one of Harrison's junior associates added. Once the first one falls, the rest will follow in rapid succession. Their reputation will be in tatters. No one will extend them a lifeline. Phase 3 was the reckoning. Once Liam owned the entirety of their debt, he would consolidate it under a single, new holding company. He would then call in the entire debt, effective immediately. When they inevitably defaulted, he would foreclose on every asset tied to the loans, the company, the houses, the cars, the yachts, everything. And the final meeting? Liam asked. The reveal? Harrison's smile returned. We will arrange a final last-ditch meeting. They will be invited to our London headquarters to plead their case to the new, mysterious owner of their debt. They will walk into the boardroom expecting to beg for mercy from a stranger. And they will find me, Liam finished. Precisely, Harrison confirmed. Theatrics are a crucial part of the law, Mr. Sterling. It ensures the message is received not just intellectually, but emotionally. They will understand the totality of their defeat. Liam felt a grim satisfaction settle over him. The plan was perfect. It was cold, clinical, and utterly devastating. It used the system they worshipped, the system of money and power, to bring about their ruin. It was a justice so poetic it was almost biblical. Initiate Phase 1, Liam said, his voice devoid of any emotion. As soon as possible. He returned to his modest suburban home 2 days later. Sophia was there, her mood even fouler than usual. She barely acknowledged his return. "Where have you been?" she demanded, not looking up from her phone. "Your family matter took long enough." "It was complicated," Liam said, unpacking his small bag. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were an actor playing a familiar role.
"Everything with you is complicated and pointless," she sneered. "Julian is taking me to Paris next month for my birthday. I suppose you'll be here, moping around this dreadful little house." "Sounds nice," Liam said calmly. He watched her, this woman who had shared his bed for years, and felt nothing but a profound, hollow emptiness. The love had been dead for so long, and he was only now burying the corpse. He did not have to wait long. 3 days later, the first tremor hit. Liam was in the kitchen making coffee when Marcus stormed into the house, not even bothering to knock. His face was pale and slick with sweat. "Sophia!" he yelled, his voice tight with panic. "We have a problem, a big one." Sophia came down the stairs, looking annoyed. "What is it, Marcus? I'm on a call." "Helios Capital," he said, waving his phone frantically. "Our main lender. They've invoked the material adverse change clause. They're sending in a team of forensic accountants from Hong Kong. A full audit."
"They've frozen our credit line until it's complete." Sophia's face paled. "What? Why? It has to be a mistake." "It's no mistake," Marcus snapped. "It's an attack. Some corporate raider nonsense. Dad is on the phone with the lawyers, but they're not getting anywhere. These people are stonewalling us." Liam watched them from the kitchen, a silent observer to the first crack appearing in their marble facade. He took a slow sip of his coffee, the warmth spreading through his chest. He feigned a look of concern. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked, his voice soft and earnest. Sophia shot him a look of pure venom. "Do? What could you possibly do? This is a world you don't understand, Liam. This is about real money. Just stay out of the way. You'll only make things worse." He just nodded, retreating back into his role as the useless, powerless husband. He stayed out of the way, just as she asked. He watched from the shadows as their world began to unravel, thread by thread. The audit was brutal. The accountants from Helios were relentless, combing through every expense, every projection, every deal. They were not just checking the books, they were dissecting the company's very soul, and they found it to be diseased. They found inflated revenue forecasts, questionable asset valuations, and a level of executive compensation that was utterly unjustifiable given the company's performance. Disbelief quickly curdled into full-blown panic. The report from the audit, leaked to a financial newswire by one of Harrison's anonymous contacts, was devastating. It painted a picture of a company on the brink of insolvency, mismanaged and fundamentally unsound. The stock price for Prestige Holdings, which was publicly traded, began to plummet. It started as a trickle, then became a torrent. Liam watched the ticker on his private terminal, a cascade of red numbers that was like a symphony of destruction. The second domino fell a week later. Spooked by the audit report and the stock collapse, Prestige's secondary lender, a major European bank, issued a margin call. They demanded an immediate infusion of capital to cover the drop in value of the assets securing their loan. It was money the family simply did not have. Marcus and his father were in a state of constant, frantic motion. Their days were a blur of desperate phone calls and humiliating meetings, begging for extensions, for new lines of credit, for a lifeline from anyone who would listen. But the world of finance is a brutal one. No one helps a sinking ship. They strip it for parts. Sophia's demeanor at home became unbearable. Her anxiety manifested as pure rage, and it was all directed at Liam. He was the symbol of her downfall, a living embodiment of failure that she was shackled to. One evening she came home, her face a mask of fury. She had clearly been crying. "This is your fault," she hissed, throwing her purse onto the floor. Liam looked up from the book he was reading. "My fault? How?" "Your bad luck. Your negativity. Ever since you lost everything, you've been this black cloud hanging over me, dragging me down. I was a rising star at the company, and now it's all falling apart. You've poisoned my life." He said nothing. He simply absorbed the tirade, his expression unreadable. Inside, he felt a cold, hard satisfaction. She was so blinded by her own arrogance she couldn't see the truth. She needed a scapegoat, and he was the perfect candidate. The cascade accelerated. Key suppliers, worried they wouldn't get paid, began demanding cash on delivery, choking the company's operations. Several high-level executives, the ones who knew just how bad things really were, quietly tendered their resignations and jumped ship. The articles in the financial press went from speculative to predatory, circling like sharks that smelled blood in the water. Liam played his part to perfection. He would read the bad news in the paper and shake his head with a pained expression. "This is terrible, Sophia. I'm so sorry." He even offered, with perfect sincerity, to get a second job waiting tables to help with their household expenses. That was the moment she finally snapped. Her face contorted with a rage, so pure it was almost breathtaking. She picked up a glass of water from the table and threw it in his face. The water was cold, but her eyes were colder. "My family is losing $1 billion empire, and you offer to make $10 an hour?" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Do you hear how pathetic you are? Your pathetic little gestures won't save us. You can't save anything. You are useless." He slowly wiped the water from his face with the back of his hand. He didn't flinch, he didn't raise his voice, he just looked at her, his patient, empty eyes reflecting her own frantic desperation. The last ember of affection he might have had for her was extinguished in that moment, drowned by the cold water and her colder words. He saw her for what she was, a shallow, cruel woman who was now reaping what she had sown. And he felt nothing. Meanwhile, in the quiet, efficient world of Harrison's law firm, Phase 2 was complete. Liam's other entities had successfully and anonymously acquired over 95% of Prestige Holdings' total outstanding debt. The trap was set. The cage was built. All that was left was to spring it. The final act was approaching. Harrison informed Liam that the family, in a last, desperate gambit, had requested a face-to-face meeting with the principal of the holding company that now owned their fate. They wanted to fly to London to plead their case. They believe they are coming to negotiate the terms of their surrender, Harrison said over the phone, a note of satisfaction in his voice. They have no idea they are coming to their own execution. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday in the main boardroom of the London skyscraper that served as the headquarters for the newly formed Sterling Global Holdings. The name was a final, ironic twist of the knife that they would not appreciate until it was too late. Liam flew to London the day before. He was fitted for a suit, a bespoke creation of such quality and understated power that it felt like armor. He spent the evening with Harrison going over the final documents, the foreclosure notices, the asset seizure warrants, the bankruptcy filings. It was a mountain of paper that represented the complete annihilation of a dynasty. On the morning of the meeting, Liam stood before the mirror in his hotel suite. The man looking back at him was a stranger. The last 3 years had been a crucible, burning away the naive, trusting man he had once been. What was left was harder, colder, and infinitely more powerful. He was no longer the charity case. He was the reckoning. The boardroom was on the top floor, a cavern of glass and steel that overlooked the sprawling city of London. It was a place of immense, intimidating power. Liam sat at the head of the long, polished obsidian table. Harrison was to his right, flanked by a team of impassive lawyers who looked like they were carved from granite. They waited in silence. Liam looked out the window, watching the tiny cars and people below. He felt a profound sense of calm. The storm within him had passed. Now he was the storm. At precisely 10 o'clock, the boardroom doors opened. Sophia and Marcus walked in, followed by their father, a man who looked like he had aged 20 years in the past month. They looked haggard, defeated, their expensive clothes hanging on them like costumes. They were rehearsing their lines as they entered, whispering frantically to each other. "Let me do the talking, Marcus. We need to be humble, contrite," Sophia was saying. Then they looked up. They saw the figure at the head of the table. They froze, their faces already pale, drained of all remaining colour. Sophia's mouth fell open. Marcus staggered back a step, as if he had been physically struck. Their father simply stared, his eyes wide with utter, uncomprehending shock. It was Liam. He was not the man they knew. He was not the quiet, downtrodden husband in the ill-fitting suit. He was seated at the throne of their destroyer, wearing a suit that cost more than their car, radiating an aura of absolute, unshakable authority. The silence in the room was deafening. It was broken only by a small, choked sound from Sophia. Liam let them stand there for a long moment, letting the reality of the situation sink in. He let them see the predator they had mistaken for prey. Finally, he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it filled the cavernous room, cutting through the silence like a shard of ice. "Hello, Sophia, Marcus, Mr. Davenport," he said, his tone chillingly polite. "Please take a seat. I believe you wanted to have a meeting with the new owner of your debt." They remained frozen, paralyzed by disbelief. Liam leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "You seem surprised to see me here? You were expecting a faceless corporation, I imagine. A shark from Hong Kong. You spent so much time looking across the world for your enemy, you never thought to look across your own dinner table." His eyes locked onto Sophia's. "You were right about one thing, Sophia. You said my worth was tied to my bank account. You were just looking at the wrong account. For 3 years, I let you believe I was broken. I let you believe I was worthless. I wanted to see what kind of person you were when the money was gone. He let that hang in the air, and you showed me. And you showed me a cruelty and a contempt I never thought possible. You mocked me. You shamed me. You flaunted your affair in my face, believing I was too weak, too poor to do anything about it." He shifted his gaze to Marcus. "And you, Marcus, my charity case. You enjoyed it, didn't you? Kicking a man when he was down. It made you feel big. It made you feel powerful." He looked at the father, the patriarch of the crumbling empire. "And you watched it all. You cultivated this belief in your family that wealth is a measure of a person's soul. You taught them that people without money are people without value." Liam stood up slowly, his movement deliberate and commanding. He walked around the table until he was standing behind Sophia's chair. She flinched as he drew near. "The irony," he said, his voice a low murmur directly behind her, "is that the entire time you were mocking my poverty, you were living on my money. The house, the cars, the parties, the trips to Paris with Julian, all of it was funded by loans from a company that I own. Your entire lifestyle was my charity." He walked back to the head of the table and picked up a single sheet of paper. "You came here to beg for mercy, to ask for an extension, to negotiate. But the time for negotiation is over." He slid the paper across the polished table. It glided silently until it stopped directly in front of Sophia. It was the foreclosure notice. It detailed the immediate seizure of all assets belonging to Prestige Holdings and the Davenport family. Marcus finally found his voice. It was a strangled, pathetic whisper. You can't do this." "I can," Liam said simply. "And I have. As of this morning, your company no longer exists. Your credit lines are terminated. Your assets are frozen. The homes you sleep in tonight will belong to my holding company by the end of the week. You have nothing." That was when Sophia broke. The shock gave way to a primal, guttural scream of pure rage and disbelief. "You monster!" she shrieked, her face contorting into an ugly mask. "You liar! 3 years! You let me believe! You watched us! This was all a game to you!" "It was not a game," Liam replied, his voice still unnervingly calm. "It was a lesson in character, and you all failed spectacularly." Sophia lunged across the table, trying to claw at him, her eyes wild with hysteria. "I'll ruin you! I'll tell everyone what you did!" Harrison spoke for the first time, his voice dry as dust. "I wouldn't advise that, madam. Given the evidence of systemic fraud our audit has uncovered, I imagine you and your family will be far too preoccupied with the Serious Fraud Office to worry about Mr. Sterling's reputation." The mention of criminal charges was the final blow. Marcus collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands, his body shaking with sobs. The father stood, mute and ashen, a statue of a broken man. Sophia's rage dissolved into pathetic, desperate begging. "Liam, please," she cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "I love you. I always have. I was just stressed. We can fix this. We can go back to how it was." Liam looked at her, at this woman pleading for a past she herself had destroyed, and he felt the last, final vestige of any connection to her sever. "No," he said, his voice final. "We can't. You didn't love me. You loved what you thought I had. When you thought it was gone, you threw me away like garbage. The only thing you love is money, and now you don't even have that." He turned to Harrison. "Our business here is concluded." He gave Sophia one last dismissive look. "Security will show you out." He turned and walked toward a private door at the side of the room, not looking back. He could hear Sophia's screams echoing behind him, a mixture of threats and pleas that faded as the heavy door clicked shut, sealing them in the tomb of their own making. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Just as Harrison had predicted, the downfall of the Davenport family was total. Prestige Holdings was liquidated, its assets sold off to cover a fraction of the debts it owed. The family was forced into bankruptcy, stripped of their homes, their cars, and every last trapping of the wealth they had worshipped. Worse for them, the fraud investigation proceeded with grim efficiency. Marcus and his father were indicted on multiple counts of financial fraud and conspiracy. Their faces, once splashed across society pages, were now on the evening news, pictured in grainy photos as they were escorted from a courthouse. They were sentenced to several years in prison, their arrogance and pride turning to shame and fear behind bars. Sophia was left with nothing. Her wealthy friends, including the ever-pragmatic Julian, abandoned her overnight. She was a social pariah, a symbol of a spectacular fall from grace. The last Liam heard, she was working a menial retail job in a distant suburb, living in a small, rented apartment. She had become the very thing she had despised, an ordinary person struggling to get by. A charity case. Liam, however, did not indulge in the spoils of his victory. He had no interest in yachts or mansions or a life of idle luxury. He had seen firsthand how such a life could poison the soul. He sold off the majority of the frivolous assets acquired from the foreclosure, keeping only what was necessary for his new purpose. He established the Sterling Foundation for Ethical Enterprise. With the vast resources at his command, he created an organization dedicated to supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs who had been crushed by predatory financial practices. He funded startups that prioritized integrity over profit at all costs. He built training centers to teach financial literacy to those who had been excluded from the system. He was using his grandfather's legacy not to accumulate more power, but to rebalance the scales. He did not live in a palace. He kept the small, quiet suburban house that Sophia had hated so much. It was his sanctuary, a reminder of the simple life he had clung to while the storm raged around him. He found a quiet satisfaction in his work, a sense of purpose that all the money in the world could not buy on its own. Months passed. The world of the Davenports became a distant, faded memory. One crisp autumn afternoon, Liam was sitting in a small, independent coffee shop not far from his home. He was sketching ideas in a notebook for a new community arts center the foundation was planning to build. The aroma of coffee and the low murmur of conversations filled the air. He was completely absorbed in his work when a woman's voice interrupted his thoughts. "That's a really interesting floor plan," she said. "Are you an architect?" Liam looked up. A woman with warm, intelligent eyes and a friendly smile was looking over his shoulder at his notebook. She was dressed simply, in jeans and a sweater, and had a dusting of what looked like charcoal on her cheek. "Oh no, just an amateur," Liam said, smiling back. "I have the ideas, but I lack the skill to make them beautiful." "Well, the ideas are the most important part," she said, pulling up a chair. "Beauty without function is just decoration. I'm Clara, by the way." She extended a hand. "I am an architect." He shook her hand. Her grip was firm and confident. "Liam," he said. "Just Liam. Not Liam Sterling, the billionaire. Not Liam Sterling, the corporate executioner. Just Liam." They talked for over an hour. They talked about architecture, about art, about building things that last. Her passion for her work was infectious. She spoke of creating spaces that served communities, not just egos. Her values seemed to mirror his own. The conversation was easy, natural, and completely devoid of pretense. She did not ask what he did, where he lived, or what car he drove. She was interested in his thoughts, his ideas. She was interested in him. When she finally had to leave, she scribbled her number on a napkin. "If you ever want a professional to help make your ideas beautiful, give me a call," she said with a wink. As he watched her walk away, Liam felt a sense of peace he hadn't realized he was missing. He looked down at the number on the napkin, then out the window at the falling leaves. For 3 years he had pretended to have nothing, a painful charade that had stripped his life down to its studs. But in doing so, he had discovered everything. He learned that his marriage was a hollow shell. He learned the true character of those around him. And thanks to his grandfather's strange and wonderful test, he had discovered a strength within himself he never knew he possessed. He realized that true wealth was not the staggering number in a Swiss bank account. That was just a tool. True wealth was integrity. It was purpose. It was the quiet dignity of a man who knew his own worth, independent of the world's judgment. True power was not in having billions of dollars, but in knowing deep in your soul that you didn't need a single cent of it to define who you were. He had finally opened the door his grandfather had told him about, and on the other side he had found himself.